Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of Corel Gallane, or parts outside of Corel Gallane. So, let's look at chapters 5 and 6 of Fall of Light. I finished them a couple of hours ago, and now I feel ready to talk about them. And maybe I'll even manage to talk about chapters 7 and 8 and wrap up book 1 later tonight. We'll see how that goes. But for now, let's get started, shall we? Cheers. All right. So, chapters 5 and 6 concern themselves with the war against death. You remember the stuff that happened back in Forge of Darkness, with Hood's wife being killed by Erastus and Setchulath, and Hood swearing and calling for people to join him on his war against death. We'll see how that goes in the future. For now, we start out with another interruption by our main narrator. A narrator, like second rank, you know what I mean. Blind Galan is once again Galaning it up, so to speak, and that's something that I really find interesting and appreciate compared to Forge of Darkness. That in Fall of Light, we have way more of Galan, like, actively, putting in his thoughts and his ideas and, like, commentary, and I personally enjoy that. I like that in general, like, this idea of, like, breaking well, it's not even the fourth wall, you know what I mean? When, like, in a tale that has this narrative frame of, like, being told to us by someone else, I appreciate it when that frame narrator is sometimes actually addressing us and talking to us, and he does that here and mentions that it's time for a change of pace, and yeah, that's what we get, because with chapters 5 and 6, the overall pace seems much slower, even though a lot of shit happens, right? Like, a lot of things happen at that point with the Akai, and then with Yakut and other people at Hood's, like, at the army camp in the ruins of Umtos Falak. But first, let's look a bit at the Azathanai things, the ruminations about the Azathanai, who they are, what they are, and the question, what makes a god? Now, this is something that is very, very interesting, because from what we see, the Azathanai have always been there. Lots of them have always been there, and some of them have taken on the roles of deities, of gods, right? So, like, for example, Olarethil for the Dog Runners, and other, you know, potentially Draconis, but not really. Apparently, Mael is one of those Azathanai, or we learn about so later on. There's Driss, there is Ardatha, and others, right, that are later on worshipped as gods. On the other hand, we have gods that are, at least in later parts of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, for example, we have humans that become gods, that ascend to that status. And the interesting thing here is that those people kind of gain worship over time, right? It's like, for example, with Anomander Rake, who doesn't want to be a god and never really is, although some people might call him a black-winged lord and all that shit, right? But the point is, those people are. They gain worship through their deeds or other aspects of their personality, and that are thus turned into gods, which is an interesting proposition, because it kind of, makes the argument that godhood or divinity is something that can be achieved through personal virtues, or, like, virtues, probably that's not a good word for it, but it can be achieved through personal qualities that are deemed worth worship by one's adherents. Now, the other way around, with the Azathanai, it is the other way around. Those are, like, elder, powerful, extremely powerful beings that choose to make contact to specific people and are then maybe worshipped or just feared or whatever. And we get that idea of trade-off, like of trade between power from the Azathanai to their believers or worshippers in a way. Which then obviously argues that like the younger gods that gain their worship through the quality of their deeds in a way are gods that are maybe like have earned their godhood in a different way or in a better way than Azathanai have, maybe? I don't know. I'm just like ruminating here, and I don't know where this whole idea will be going in the end. But it's still about the question of like whether such a thing as godhood actually exists. Because if you break it down to just like a much more powerful being that gives up some of its power in exchange for something else, that's not very divine, is it? It's just like very, very powerful. So yeah, the question of the nature of the Azathanai is something that is very interesting and gets like raised a bit more in these chapters. Because apparently, not even the Azathanai fully understand who or what they are. So there's that. And then we meet new ones. We meet Skillen Dro, who is apparently something of a K'chain, or has at least taken the shape of the K'chain Jamal. Or the K'chain, in this case, obviously a K'chain Jamal Chigal assassin, or so I presume from his like utterances when he meets Karul. And he's interesting and maybe cool. We'll see. And he comes back from the world or plane or whatever you want to call it of the K'chain, where he has met them and been amongst them. And he talks about the idea of just the rational mind. And this is once again something that we could look at as something of a warning nowadays. The idea that if we, as sentient beings, concentrate on one aspect, one facet of our sentience, to the detriment of all others, this leads to problems. Now, this is something that has happened before, and like can lead to disastrous consequences, right? The idea that humans are all rationality, that science is the only way to go, what you might call the Enlightenment philosophy in a way, which you start with your Francis Bacon and his Novum Organon, and look at like how everything is understandable, everything can be ruled by or follows strict rules. We just need to understand those rules so we can manipulate those rules, and like the universe will be ours to play with in all kinds of ways. That is sort of the idea there, and the K'chain Jamal, the K'chain, very much follow that idea. It's like it's pure ratio, pure rules, and nothing more. Now the problem is that this is like, at least for like a very large part, this is a seductive way to think. You look at all the crazy batshit things we as humans have come up with before we like trusted in science. You look at magic, you look at religion, you look at the pre-scientific world with all its like odd beliefs and whatnot. It is hard to deny that looking at the world through a scientific, rational lens has not improved the lot of humanity as a whole. Don't get me wrong, there's been like a ton of terrible costs, right? That came with like industrialization, that came with rational, like with like the choosing that rational scientific path and mindset. A lot of it has, because obviously, and this is sort of where we come there, right, that once a specific group of people have decided to take that scientific rational path, it automatically decided, and this is where we're going here with what Skelandro says about the Kachine. What I'm trying to say as well is like to settle on that as the only correct way to view the world, the only correct worldview. And with that comes a disparaging and denial of any other way to see the world. And once you, and this is like the very human and also I presume, at least partly, Kachine way of thinking is that if you have the right way to look at the world, that being science and rational thinking, rational thought and everything, those people, those species not adhering to that are in the wrong. And since we tend to mix right and wrong with correct and incorrect, and thus like if something is correct or it is right and thus also good, like we right and wrong as pure like logical definitions are in our language and in our thoughts mixed up with a moral judgment. So being in the right is also good and being in the wrong is bad, and that gives you all kinds of rights in your logic to do a lot of terrible things to people who don't follow your worldview. Like this is exactly what happens with religion, obviously on the religious level. It also happened in a lot of ways in the scientific view. And this, I guess, is sort of the point that we should look at, the fact that logical rightness is not the same as moral rightness or correctness or goodness. Those are not moral judgments. Those are clear, just like rational judgments. And mixing those two up leads to a lot of drama, leads to a lot of disasters, and potentially a lot of deaths and like suffering. So don't do that shit. The other part of that is, and this is something that we see nowadays, especially nowadays, again, is that human minds, right? Human minds are not all logic and rational. We've known about that like basically forever. There's all kinds of like theories on like the subconscious, on like the emotional aspects of our personality, all these like things that are either not yet explained, cannot yet be explained by rational thought and science, or just the plain fact that maybe some things can't really be explained in a satisfactory way by science. And now there's like several ways to go about that and to deal with that. One of them, this is like dangerous because like you see, for example, in like recent history, history of science, the subconscious, like in the 19th, the 20th century, obviously with like your psychoanalysts, Jungs and Freuds and whatnot, they were focusing on that bit, obviously. Emotions have been an interesting focus of study, especially in fields like philosophy, because, you know, the problem that we face is the arrogance of science. Science has had such a good run at explaining the world that at least some parts of it in communication to the rest of the world claim to be able to explain everything, which clearly we can't. You look at neuroscience, we still have a lot of unanswered questions about human brains. And even though like every, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, some neuroscientist goes out and talks to some newspaper and it's like, we have explained that there is no such thing as free will. Yeah, fuck him. He hasn't explained that. He's done an experiment that doesn't prove anything. So that's like the problem that we face there. So the tendency is to either fall, because we are, as humans, terribly binary in our thought a lot of times. Our tendency is either to just say, like, fuck science, let's do all kinds of stuff, fall into, like, I don't know, the New Age, fall into esoteric ideas, whatnot, fall into conspiracy theory, or the other, like, or maybe start studying those phenomena in a way, which, for example, means that emotions have been a focus of, for example, philosophy of the mind in recent years, where we try to figure out what emotions are, how we can deal with emotions on a philosophical level that does not try to explain emotions as levels of hormones and biochemical terms, which unfortunately really don't help us in our daily life, right? Um, I'm getting very much off track here, I feel. But my point is that the K'chain Timal are a terrible example, or the K'chain are a terrible example of just cleaving to one aspect of the human, or in that case, K'chain, or general personality, that being the rational side of it, which we all have, to the exclusion of everything else, and that leads to problems in the long run. Either, yeah, like in general, it leads to those, and Skillen has recognized that, and he talks to Karul about it. Now, that's something. And then there's like interesting bits and pieces that I find like really fascinating. One of them is clearly the fact that Skillen is so powerful that he can just fight and kill dragons. Apparently, all of them, if you so choose. Um, the other thing is, I mean, it was like mentioned before, I feel, but this time it's more important. The fact that Karul can actually take on whatever gender they feel they need. Um, which, you know, I've read Left Hand of Darkness. I still find the idea of like having, and it's something that we have like in real world mythologies and so forth as well. But it's still like just to see like the casualness with which it is presented here is something that I find very fascinating. Like very interesting. It's like because it just shows us as readers that we maybe attach way too much meaning to the question of gender. So there's that. I still love the fact that Skillen is always saying like I preferred you when you were a woman. Um, yeah, it's an interesting thing. So there's that. We kind of learn how like this like world building shit going down now. Like the idea that Karul wants Skillen to help him negotiate with dragons to keep to bind different dragons to different aspects of his blood to kind of organize the magic that he has started creating by giving his blood. So we see how that actually like works, and this is something that I find so fascinating with the Carcanas trilogy. Like I know people went and like a lot of people are like saying the Carcanas trilogy is like the Silmarillion or whatever. It's not, because the Silmarillion is very very abstract, has a high level of abstraction in most parts of it. We never get like almost never get like any like actual explanation of how the Valar or like how the Ainur created like Middle Earth and what they did. But here with the Carcana strategy, it's like, yeah, how does magic work? Apparently, it works like a very anemic Karul and a baffled and slightly angry Skillen wander around, find dragons, and beat them over the head until they decide to actually work together with them and do stuff with magic. And there's an interesting thing to that, and that's something that I appreciate about what Carcanas does. It shows us that there is no such thing as like a golden age or like something. I mean, yes, people here are apparently more powerful than latter day, or like not apparently, but seem to be more powerful on like a level of power or whatever to compared to say characters in the Malazan Book of the Fallen or The God Is Not Willing or whatever, but only slightly, I guess. And their struggles that create the world that people later on see are the same very human struggles that we have. It's not like God says, let there be light and let there be magic. It's God says, let's find some dragons and punch them in the face. Which, I don't know, is more relatable, at least to me. Maybe I'm a flawed person. All right. Now let's have us a bit of a look at Thalakai. We meet some of them, and it's interesting. Um, on a lot of levels, like we've often spoken about the fact that there is a lot of humor in the works of Steven Erikson and Cam Esselmont that sometimes gets lost because, and this is, I feel like an expectation thing, right? The Malazan writings have been blown out of all proportions by some of their fans that claim they are the best thing written in fantasy ever, and on such a high brain level that, yeah, you basically gain a PhD just by reading those books. Which, nope. If you read them too much, you tend to not get your PhD. I can attest to that. But my point is that for some reason we tend to disparage humor. We tend to denigrate humor and see it as something like simple or mean or whatever compared to serious discussion and philosophy, which is bullshit. Humor can be clever, humor can be very intelligent, humor can be very, very dumb. Serious texts can be very, very intelligent, or they can be very, very dumb, or even worse, they can be written by Ayn Rand, and that's like, you don't want to go there. Um, my point is that the Malazan Book of the Fallen has a lot of humor, and it has a lot of humor of all kinds of like stripes, right? There's puns, there's like very, very slapstick humor, like there's fecal humor that just goes all into, well, shits and giggles, so to speak. Well, meet the Thalakai, who are a very, very humorous people apparently, or are presented in that way. And it's still difficult to read them. You start and they're like, holy shit, are they dumb? Like, well, no. They're just like a more, like, they're different. And there's humor in there. There's an interesting society there with them not believing in their gods anymore, the rock gods. There's also their society that's fascinating, that apparently they have polygamy, but in the opposite way of how most, at least Western societies, think of it, because of a scarcity of Thalakai women, they are allowed to take more than one husband. And the one that we see here is super fascinating, super fun, especially when you have the three husbands following her and talking about the advantages and disadvantages. Because, see, subverting tropes and all that stuff, like the cliche of the wife that it's always the wife doesn't like working like girlfriend or whatever other relationship. The idea that the wife can't cook and the husband is always complaining about it is a cliche that we've seen everywhere, from like the very, very terrible running gag about that thing in, say, like something like Lethal Weapon. It's been all over the place. It's dumb and it's sexist as fuck. So what we have here? We have her not being good at cooking apparently, and her husband's being happy that she's away because now they can actually cook for themselves, which is the step that no one ever takes in those like making fun, like sexist fun of like the inability of a woman to cook. It's never like, well, in that case I'll just cook because I can do it better, which would be like, the rational arguments. Like, if you enjoy cooking, if you enjoy doing specific things, and you think you're the most qualified person in whatever kind of relationship you have, then go ahead and do that thing instead of just like sitting back and complaining. It's dumb. So we see that there, and I like it. It's interesting. I appreciate it. Also, what we see with the Thalakai there is, yeah, they're still the same Thalakai. They really love just like going into like solving things in a physical way, thinking about their deeds afterwards, right? So we see that when the three attack the dragon. We see it later on when the dragon gets actually killed, and then something interesting happens. That is drinking the dragon's blood, because we already know that that's sort of like where the soul taken thing comes from. We have all these people drinking dragon blood later on, like, you know, also we've heard, like, and this is what I like so much about it, is like, you read the Malaz's Book of the Falls, like, they have the blood of Tiam in them, and turns out that's quite literally what happens, because a dumb Thalik, and they find it out it's because a dumb Thalakai figured it's a good idea to drink the blood of the dragon he's just slain. Which, you know, makes me question, like, ask the question, like, do you actually have to kill a dragon, or could this also be like a gift of blood? We'll see how that turns out in the future. So far, fun and games there. Now let's, like, I don't know, move to Arathan, whom we hadn't seen before in this book. So chapter 5, we met no characters that we hadn't known before. Like, I guess, like, the one takeaway there from it is also that the dragon names are eerily similar to later on Warren names. We have Tennis there that gets killed. We have someone called something something Rashanis, whatever, and I forgot what. Oh yeah, Mokra, of course, Mokra. So that whole connection with the dragon names connected to the Warrens is also in there. And it's interesting to see because Mokra is one of those that we meet in Dust of Dreams, obviously. It's one of those, you know, chained to some rocks or whatever in Emerlan. So I guess we'll see her in the future. Good old Mokra. Now let's look at the Jaghut and the camp, and everyone showing up, and everyone preparing for the war against death, and the question, like, how do you do that? How do you actually fight against death? And we have, like, more Jaghut discussions or non-discussions, which I find you know, interesting and fun just by themselves. Jaghut dialogues are always interesting and cool to listen to. We also meet the Seragal, who are annoying even before they get buried in an Azath house. So I'm wondering how they end up there in that Azath house. Apparently they do something dumb before the army even starts, because, you know, they're not dead. They're just, like, buried in an Azath house when we meet them at the end of Midnight Tides. So there's that. We'll see how that goes. What else? Right, the discussion of family and friendship and how those work. And that family is something that is very difficult to escape from, because we have no choice about family, but friends are the family that we choose. Now that's obviously like a truism that we've, like, everyone, like, it's not exactly big wisdom that friends are the family we choose. Obviously we all know that. But what I was trying to say is the part of, like, how friendship works or cannot work, and how some people are, like, so full of life that they feel that they can give of themselves continuously to people that are in need or are needy, and that how that in the long run does not work, because a friendship is always about a partnership, like of equals, somehow equals, which, you know, it's also not exactly big news, but it's still something that we tend to forget a lot. Like, I tend to forget a lot, and other people I know tend to forget a lot too. So yeah, having that is interesting, especially from someone like Gothas, whom we have, you know, seen a bunch of times. Like, Gothos is, like, a super fascinating character for me, because the way he just casually changes from being super annoying to actually caring, and then just does something annoying again. Yeah, I like him. Also, he already likes tea, and no one else likes tea. So he's my tea champion of the Malazan universe. Another thing about that army that is going to go and fight against death that I personally find very fascinating, or not fascinating, but significant, is the fact that when we get like hints of like who is in that camp, it's everyone, right? There's even like former like people that have fought against each other. There's like Jellican there. There's Forulkan, who I suspect will be Forkul Sale. I mean, yeah, they will be. There is Teist there, who have just recently had some kind of a war going on, or so I've heard. The point there is that grief and the rage against death, the pointless rage against death, not pointless, but the one that cannot, you cannot win against death, or can you? Is universal, because death is universal, and that I feel is the big takeaway there, which you have these like this idea that everyone is like voicing again and again is like, so Hood calls like for people to join him in his fight against his war against death, and everyone was like, on the surface this is like a super dumb idea, like who would fight death? How would you fight death? Who would do that? And then he will probably just have like his nearest of kin, like 5 people there. And turns out, nope, because we all have struggled with death. We all have like railed against death, the injustice of death, railed against it, because that's what grief is, right? Grief is railing against the implacability of the universe, of the random nature of the universe. So yeah, everyone has a stake in this, which makes the whole idea so staggering. The idea of like going to war against death. Yeah. Yeah, I feel I've run out of like ideas, like smart or semi-smart ideas. So once again, if you've made it so far, this far, thanks for watching, liking, subscribing, whatever you do with this. Let me hear your thoughts. I'll be back later or tomorrow or whenever. Uh, Probably later. Anyway, have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. Until then, cheers.